Hi there, my name is Katie Saint. I am from Fox Valley Autism, and this video is about setting up your home for success. And what about siblings? So, one of the core beliefs of ABA is that the environment determines behaviors. And so that means how you set up your home is key for how your children will behave. So I want to start with talking about some ABA terminology that control behavior. So the first term I want to talk about is SDs and S deltas. So SD stands for stimulus discrimination. And what SDs are is like an open sign for reinforcement. What that means is something or somebody signals to your child that reinforcement is available. So I'm using the terms reinforcement and punishment as general terms that mean something that will increase behavior, reinforcement, or something that will decrease behavior, punishment. So an SD is a signal or a sign that says reinforcement is available. An S delta is a sign that says reinforcement is not available. And so we need to think about our homes then, and we need to think about what am I doing, or how is my home set up in a way that signals that reinforcement is available or that it signals that reinforcement is not available. If our signals are signaling reinforcement for problem behaviors, that's going to make our lives more difficult. So, for example, if mom walks in and mom is an SD for reinforcement for attention-seeking behavior, if the child knows that if I cry, mom will give me attention and snuggles and love, she's the SD for reinforcement for that behavior. If we change that, if we have mom stop reinforcing attention behavior, and if we have mom consistently not reinforce that behavior, she will become the S delta. And that means it will communicate to the child that reinforcement is not available for that behavior. Therefore, it will go away. Now, this is a really big deal because what this means is if you are established as an SD for reinforcement for problem behavior, as soon as you walk in, that child is going to increase the problem behavior. Just you being there is like a neon sign saying, hey, if you do that problem behavior, it's going to get reinforced now. If the child has made that association that you reinforce that problem behavior, when you're there, the child will display it more. But the good news is if you become an S delta, if you associate with the child that reinforcement is not available for that problem behavior, the child's not even going to try because, again, it's like there's a neon sign that's saying reinforcement is not available for this problem behavior. Don't bother trying because it's not going to be reinforced. So it's really, really important that we analyze in our home life what we are S deltas for and what we are SDs for. Now, it doesn't have to be people. Sometimes it's the time of day or it's the location. For example, I am probably way more consistent with my parenting in the morning and afternoon. Come nighttime when I'm tired and I just want to relax, I maybe will choose to ignore a behavior and just let it go rather than to intervene and be consistent because I'm exhausted and I'm just ready to shut down for the day. So, to my children, perhaps nighttime is the SD for escape behavior, problem behavior where, oh, you know what, at nighttime, if mom tells me to do something, I don't actually have to listen to it because she's probably not going to follow through anyway. But if it's morning, that's the SD for, oh man, mom is going to follow through, so I better listen. So whatever patterns that we're consistent with, they become SDs or S deltas. And so if we can identify them, we can manipulate them so that they are in our favor. Once an SD and an S delta gets established, our work is done. The child just performs based on what the signals are saying. So if mom or dad is an SD or an S delta for problem behavior, their behavior will follow accordingly. So this is something to analyze in your own home life and to debate with anyone who lives with you to help identify what SDs and S deltas are in place. An example from just everyday life how SDs and S deltas are in play. The morning for me is an SD for coffee. I'm going to drink coffee in the morning and it's going to provide reinforcement. It's going to wake me up. At night, that's an S delta for coffee because if I drink coffee at night, it no longer provides reinforcement and it provides punishment because it's going to keep me up and I'm not going to sleep as good at night. So in your own life, analyze this and try and figure out what patterns are in place so that you can manipulate them so that your life is easier because of it. Now, regarding siblings, they can play a role in this too. Take attention-seeking behavior. Sometimes my kids are notorious, especially my youngest child, for attention-seeking behavior from his brother. So he will purposely annoy his brother and do things that gets a reaction out of his brother because it's an instant way to interact with him. And so my oldest son is an SD to my youngest son for attention-seeking behavior that's annoying. And so if I want my youngest son to stop annoying his older brother, I need to coach my oldest son on how to react. If my oldest son keeps responding with, "Hey, knock it off, stop doing that," and they get into arguments and fights over it, that actually reinforces the youngest son. He's getting that reaction, he's getting that attention that he so craves from his older brother. So I need his older brother to only give attention when the younger brother is acting appropriately. So this means I need to train and work with my oldest son to have that kind of response. It does not come natural to children or adults for that matter to respond this way to problem behaviors. And so it takes some practice and it takes feedback and training and things like that. But if you work with your children and if you work with your spouses and each other, you can get through it and it's extremely effective. Because remember, behavior is lawful. If we can control all the variables, we can control all the behaviors. So there's been thousands of research studies and years of research that proves that when we are in control of the variables, behavior responds in an extremely predictable way. And so we can change behavior the way we want to if we follow the rules of behavior. And these are some of the rules of behavior. Now, there's another thing in play that I want you to analyze in your home life. It's called motivating operations. What motivating operations means is it's influences in the environment that increase the value of reinforcement. So, an example of that would be attention-seeking behavior. I'm currently working on my PhD. I'm very busy. I work full-time. And so, that means I get to spend less time with my kids. Therefore, the deprivation that they feel creates a motivating operation for my attention. It increases the value of attention. They have less time with me now that I'm in school. Therefore, they crave it more. And so the quality time is more valuable. When motivating operations are in play, this can either help you or hurt you. So take, for example, you're doing a reward system. You want the child to work for iPad time. And you're asking the child to do something pretty challenging, something they really don't want to do. And they're going to earn iPad minutes. Well, problem is, they get a ton of iPad time on the weekends or just in general. And so from a motivating operation standpoint, they're saturated with iPad time. They have a lot of iPad time. So if you're trying to make them work for it, they're not going to be motivated because they already have it. So that's the opposite example of the attention example that I just gave. My kids were deprived of my attention, so they craved it more. The kid who has a ton of iPad time is going to crave it less because they already have access to it. A more obvious example of this is food related. Anytime that we use food as a motivator, if a child has access to it, they're just not going to crave it as much if they have a lot of it already. So we want to analyze and manipulate these kind of things. Sometimes if we manipulate the motivating operations, we can make a problem behavior completely go away. So going back to the quality time with parents example, if a child starts having problem behavior because they learn that when I'm well behaved, my parents ignore me, but when I'm naughty, my parents give me lots of attention. Children will learn that problem behavior gets them attention too. So even though you're scolding them and yelling that at them, that attention feels good to them too, and that attention serves as reinforcement. Therefore, we need your child to decrease the value of attention or learn a different way to get attention. So a lot of times what I'll recommend to families is do proactive quality time. So for example, in my family, we have mom dates. You know, I go on quality time dates with my kids where we spend one-on-one time together and they get unconditional attention from me. And so then this decreases the problem behavior that would have happened later in the week when I'm doing hours of homework. So this can play out in your own home life. Sometimes as little as 15 minutes of quality time can prevent attention-seeking behavior later. So this is just an easy manipulation. Now, when we're talking about siblings, this is a little bit tricky. If your child is craving attention and quality time from a sibling, and a sibling doesn't want to give that attention, it can be hard to convince a child that they should and that it would benefit them. But 15 minutes of quality time with a sibling where they're doing something fun, hopefully is more enjoyable to the sibling who doesn't want the quality time than the annoying behaviors that would later follow that are attention seeking. So that is a way to manipulate the environment further. Additional examples of motivating operations are hunger and sleep deprivation. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the phrase hangry, but that's a real thing that a lot of people struggle with. You know, blood sugar levels and different things like that can cause it. But basically, the concept is when you're hungry, it's harder to control your emotions and your behavior. Therefore, our children are more at risk, and adults are more at risk to have problem behaviors when they're hungry. So if we feed them proactively and make sure they don't go too long in between meals or snacks, we can prevent problem behaviors. So hunger then is a motivating operation for problem behavior. So again, analyze what motivating operations in your home life are helping you or hurting you. Another example is sleep deprivation. This is a classic example of how when motivating operations are not helping you, problem behaviors can arise. If you're tired, you're not going to be as self-controlled, you're not going to be as kind, you're not going to be able to control your emotions as well. So if we can get our kids on a good sleep schedule, and if we can make sure that they're getting the amount of sleep they need, they're going to be more well-behaved. So this is another example of a motivating operation that's either going to help you or hurt you. So that is why you will hear your therapist talking about, okay, we want to implement a reward system, but we need something they don't have access to any other way. Your therapists are trying to manipulate the motivating operations in play. They're trying to deprive the child of that reward so that the child is extremely motivated to work for that, so that even though we're asking them to do a really challenging thing, they're willing to do it because they're deprived of that reward and they really want it. Where if we gave them free access to it, then they wouldn't crave it as much. So, next thing I want to talk about is behavior plans. Now, when we're looking at all the variables that maintain behavior, we're looking at patterns of reinforcement and patterns of punishment. So, the most addictive kind of pattern that maintains behavior is called intermittent reinforcement. And what that means is sometimes the behavior gets reinforced and sometimes it doesn't. So that's classic parenting. Honestly, I'd like to consider myself to be a pretty consistent parent, but I promise you I'm not 100% consistent. And that's why problem behavior still exists in my home. So if I'm really serious about getting rid of a problem behavior, I have to analyze how consistent I am. So take gambling, for example. If you're in a slot machine, you're not guaranteed when you're going to get that reinforcement, but eventually you will. So you just keep going, you keep going, you keep going until you get that reinforcement. And then when you do, it's extremely reinforcing, and so it maintains the behavior long term. So the same is true for our kids and parenting. So, for example, if my child asks me for candy over and over and over and over and over again, and I say, no, 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 you can't have it, but then finally they wear me out, I'm like, fine, you can have it. Then they're like, sweet, it just took 50 times of asking and then I got it. So next time I'm going to ask 50 times as well. And so that's just kind of how it goes. This is never a conscious thing, or I shouldn't say never. It doesn't have to be a conscious thing. Learning occurs through experience. It is unconscious. We don't think about it. We just experience it and our behaviors change accordingly. So we can never say that a child is too low functioning to understand the patterns of reinforcement or punishment. There are research studies on sea slugs and honeybees and snails and all of these unintelligent animals that we are shaping their behavior through patterns of reinforcement and punishment. I guarantee every child that we work with is way higher functioning than any of these studies. So the point is that patterns of reinforcement and punishment apply to every living being. So that means we can manipulate our environments and have success. This is a message of hope. We just have to be able to recognize the patterns so we can manipulate them. So, to review, look at what your SDs and S deltas are. What signals reinforcement is available in your environment? What signals reinforcement is not available in your environment? How can you change that? Motivating operations. What is increasing or decreasing the value of a reward? How do we change that? How can you work that so it's in your favor? Rewards and punishment. What patterns of rewards and punishment are in place in your home? Is a child asking for your attention appropriately, and they're not getting it, and then all of a sudden they're having problem behavior and you stop what you're doing to give them attention because you have to intervene, otherwise they're going to break your grandma's vase. Then they're learning, okay, this is how I get attention the quickest way. So we need to manipulate those patterns. So, okay, the next thing I want to talk about is siblings and that whole aspect of how are siblings being affected by having a special needs sibling. So this section of my talk is assuming that the sibling does not have special needs, but it doesn't necessarily change things if they do. So one thing to look at when analyzing how your child's sibling is handling having a sibling with disability is to review what are some common ways that siblings struggle? So I'm going to go through a list, and as I go through this list, I want you to analyze your children and think about if you're seeing any symptoms like this with them. So, okay, it is very common that a sibling will worry about their sibling. So they will be concerned, how are they going to do at school? Will anyone like them? Are they going to get in trouble? How, they might be concerned about health problems or all sorts of different things like that. One thing that's really common when we're talking about motivating operations is jealousy for attention. So it's really common that a child with special needs is going to need more attention than other siblings. So say one sibling is really well behaved, and then you have a special needs sibling who has a lot of problem behaviors and needs a lot of attention. That first sibling that's really well behaved might feel ignored. They might feel neglected, and they might feel like nobody cares about them because they're not getting any attention. So look for signs like this. Look for signs if your child is acting jealous of the attention that their special needs sibling gets. Another common fear for siblings with kids with special needs is a fear that they'll lose their sibling. Maybe they're afraid their sibling will be hospitalized. Maybe they're afraid their sibling will have to go in a different home, or maybe they're afraid their sibling will die. Who knows what your given circumstances are that determines the fears that the sibling might have, but this might be a really great question to ask your child. Hey, what do you get nervous about in regards to your brother or sister? What scares you? And just ask them. See what kind of fears they have. The next one is anger. Sometimes siblings feel gypped. Like, hey, my friends at school have siblings that they play with and that are their best friend, and I don't have a sibling that I consider my best friend, and that sucks. Or I don't like that my sibling has all this attention from my parents, and that sucks. So siblings might be resentful or angry that they don't have a sibling that is like other siblings that they see from their friends at school or different things like that. So that might be something to analyze too. If this is the case, talk to your child about the benefits. Having a sibling with special needs can actually help them in a lot of ways. Many people have employment opportunities because of it. Many people have a better understanding of people and how life works and are more mature and more responsible. And so there's tons of benefits. Or maybe their sibling has some really cool things about them that they're taking for granted. So you can point those things out too to help them feel better about their circumstances. The next one is pressure to be or do what sibling cannot. So here's a really common thing that I feel like happens out of logistical need. So say one sibling can't do a lot of things and the other sibling can, even though maybe that is more commonly the parent's responsibility, because the parent is has so many things to do or is so bogged down, it can be they can ask their other sibling to do more. So this is really, really common that the other sibling becomes a caretaker or becomes overly responsible out of logistical need. And so this puts a lot of pressure on them. They often will feel like they have these really high standards and these really high expectations. And this can lead to depression. This can cause struggles for siblings to live under these high expectations. So what you can do is just analyze, am I letting all of my kids be kids? Or am I putting too much pressure and do I have too many expectations for some of my kids? So it's something to analyze. The next one is guilt. Sometimes siblings feel guilt that either they feel guilt that they don't enjoy their sibling more, or they feel guilt that they don't have the struggles that their sibling has. Um, they can feel guilt that the parents are having such a hard time. And so they might feel like, oh my gosh, I can never upset my parents, or I can never tell my parents about my problems because my parents have so much on their plate taking care of my other sibling that I can never be a problem. So if that's the case with your child, it's really good to talk to them about that, and it's really good to reiterate to them that you're there for them, and they aren't a burden to you, and that you want to hear about their troubles, and and just talking through all of that kind of stuff with them. So the thing that you need to analyze is if these things are a problem or not, and when to get help. So, if your child's struggling with some of what I just listed, sometimes seeing a counselor would be really beneficial so that they have someone that they can talk to. There's resources in the area like that are tailored towards siblings so that siblings can have support and attention and that kind of stuff too. So there's a lot of resources out there. So analyze if your child has changes in eating or sleeping, if they have physical symptoms like headaches or stomach aches, if they talk about hopelessness a lot, or if they're really hardcore perfectionists, if they're not concentrating well, if they have low self-esteem, or if they're saying really negative things about themselves or hurting themselves, or if they're extremely clingy to you, loss of interest in preferred activities, frequently crying or worrying, or really withdrawing. If you see symptoms like that, it might be worth talking to a counselor and just giving them an outlet where they can have someone to talk to who can help them work through those things. And, they can help you too identify what sort of patterns are happening so you can help support your sibling or support all of your kids too. We love all of our kids, but all of our kids have different needs, and sometimes it's really hard to balance that, and sometimes it's really hard to know how and when to respond to things. And so having a third party come in and help you analyze that can be really useful. Because as a parent myself, I can promise you that I am blind to my household and my circumstances more than any other interaction in my whole life. And so having those outside influences are extremely helpful to making my home as healthy as possible. So that is the sibling setting your home up for success talk. Feel free to contact me if you have further questions about this topic. It's really complicated and there's a lot of patterns to analyze, but with intentional thought and effort, we can just keep making our families healthier and healthier. All right, thank you so much.